In this video, I'm going to create an applique using the Artistic Digitizer and cutting it out on my edge cutter. The examples would be, or the technique will be very similar to if you are using the Simple Cut software that came with the cutter. So the first thing you want to do is select whatever hoop you're using and then select Create New. So the first thing you want to do is under Techniques, and this will be the first window that will come up in Simple Cut. Be sure to select Embroidery and Cut, and then click OK. Now I'm going to use a clip art. So we're just going to go to Tools, Clip Art Library, Insert Clip Art. Now you can bring in any clip art or any type of graphic you want, but you do have a whole library of clip art that came with your software. Under the search, I'm just going to type in flower, and then I'll be able to find different flowers that I want. And I am going to choose just a simple flower, number 6. If you look at the arrow here, it indicates the direction that you're going to click to create that flower. I'm going to click Insert, then I'm going to click and drag straight up, and that will create my flower for me. Now it automatically is going to fill with stitches. The first thing I want to do is separate the two colors. I'm going to click on the Auto or the Sequence tab in the Simple Cut. So you now see that I have two different sequences. I'm going to right click inside my shape and ungroup it. So now I'm able to select just my pink, and I'm going to click on Applique. Now you'll notice that it selected each petal. I want one applique stitch all the way around. I'm going to click under Shaping. I'm going to select Weld. That makes all of this one shape, and now you can see that I just have one applique stitch all the way around my flower. So let's review the properties over here. So under Fabric Trim, you can have it during embroidery. You could select Pre-Cut plus Glue. So I'm using Steam a Seam 2, which means I'm going to cut it and then just stick it down. So I could choose that one. If you choose Pre-Cut plus Zigzag, it's going to add an extra zigzag stitch or an extra E-stitch. So I'm going to go ahead and just leave it at during embroidery so that you can see if you don't have the cutter, it will add an extra tack down line. So we'll review that. So you can see it automatically added a stitch. That's my default stitch. So I could change that. I can go to the outline, and you can see here's the applique stitch that it defaulted to. I could select that and I could change it to another type of stitch if I wanted. I'm going to leave it at the applique stitch, but I want to change the width because I like my applique stitch to be wider. This is a very, very tiny stitch. Now I could type in, for example, 0.25 to make it 1/4 of an inch. Or if you're used to selecting your appliques by millimeters, as your machine would be, I could type in millimeters. So let's say I want this to be fairly wide. I'm going to make it 6 millimeters so it really shows up. So I can type in 6 mm, and it will automatically default and change that to whatever the corresponding number of inches is. So you can go back and forth between millimeters and inches, and you can see that that's a much more prominent applique stitch now. I could go down here under offset. Now it defaults to 0, meaning that the stitch is going to be placed right on the cut edge, and that's what I want, so I'm going to leave that alone. I could change the stitch length if I wanted, but I'm going to leave that alone as well. So we'll come back to our fill where we have the applique settings. Under my cutter presets, if I am pre-cutting it, I can go to my cutter presets. I'm going to select fabric backed with fusible web. That's going to tell me to use my yellow blade. So when I'm ready to select this or to finish it up and save it, I'm going to put it in the center. I'm just going to put 0 by 0. Let's go back and select all so that it moves everything together. I could also, when I go to send it, I could hit center to hoop, and that would center the whole thing in the hoop as well. So now I'm going to explain the difference between saving it and exporting it. So when I do a file save as, if I want to make any changes to this, I would save it as a .draw file. That would allow me to make any changes that I want. So normally I would save that to my computer, but I'll save it on my flash drive just so you can see the two different file types. Now if I want to make my own folder, I'm going to go to folder here and I'll make an applique folder. And I placed it inside my EMB folder, so you'll see that in a minute. So now when I'll name it flower 1, and it's a draw file. So the draw file would be opened in my software if I wanted to make any changes to any of the properties. To get it to my machine, I'm going to click on the drop down here. I could send it by Wi-Fi, change the machine. I'm going to go ahead and just select USB. And here's my USB stick here, and here's my applique folder here. I could also go down and I could have made a folder here. I'm going to select applique. You can see I have a draw file there. It's now going to write it as a JPX, which is the format for my 15,000, or you could have saved it as a JEF as well. I'm going to go ahead and click export, and now that is on my machine, ready to go. Then we can send that to our cutter and we'll review that as well. So if you are pre-cutting, we'll review the settings on the cutter. So I'm going to click File, Export to Cutter. Now it's important that you load your mat prior to doing this. So we have loaded the mat and I'm going to hit 2 cutters. I'm going to select my cutter and hit connect. Now we'll be showing the actual cutting, but I want to review the settings here. This is the arrows that I can use to move the laser. So when I show how I'm moving the laser, I'm using these arrows here, or I could use the arrows on my keyboard. So it's important to load the mat first, then after loading the mat, you're using these arrows or the arrows on your keyboard. Then when I trace it, I'm going to be hitting the trace button here and following the laser. So we'll talk about the laser placement. I'm going to place my laser in the upper left corner so it will trace around like so. If I were fussy cutting, I could place my laser in the center, and then when it traced, I would know that I'm tracing around a certain center point. So you can place that laser wherever it is you want. And then when you're ready, then you hit cut. This also tells me what blade to have in. You can also do a test cut to make sure that it's cutting properly before you sew. So those are the settings there, and then the next video will show how to do the actual cutting.